Hi, welcome to One on the Page. I'm Scott. This is the weekly reading wrap up for, well, I guess the first half of June. I'm still trying to catch up on videos, getting them done consistently. So after this, I should be doing weekly reading wrap ups. I will be actually doing two, one for, I don't know, mainstream books or books that don't necessarily fall with a certain genre, and then one covering any sapphic romances that I read because I tend to read those rather quickly, and oftentimes I read way more than really should be covered in one video. So I decided to separate the two. I will link to the sapphic romances in up here and also in the description. But let's go ahead and get started. In June, so far, not counting the sapphic romances, and another reason why I split these up because it's a little bit embarrassing, not because I'm reading sapphic romances, but because I read so many, it's just like, oh, you don't have a life, Scott. That's rude, but not inaccurate. So, but in June, non-sapphic romances, I read three books. I hope to shift the balance a little bit here between the two sapphic romances and non-sapphic romances, but right now it's very heavily in the favor of one. I read three non-sapphic romances this month. The first one I finished was The Return of the King, book three of The Lord of the Rings. It is a book that I have read before, obviously. It's one that I listened to on audiobook. Most of it, I did read some of it on Kindle, but most of it was listening on audiobook. It was the Andy Serkis version. He does an excellent job. Many of his voices sound like those of the actors who portrayed the characters in the movies. I love Lord of the Rings. Sam Gamgee, as I have mentioned before, is my old-time favorite sidekick character. Uh, Possibly one of my old-time favorite characters, with no caveat on it, but definitely my favorite sidekick. And I tend to love sidekick characters more than other types of characters. Dr. John Watson is my number two. I believe I mentioned that before too. Uh, Piglet, one of my other favorites. Those are probably my top three sidekicks. Uh, as I said, I've read this book before. I knew what I was getting into. Although I have to be honest, I have not read this since the movies came out. I've read it many times before, but yeah, I haven't read it since the movies came out and got struck in all three books about the differences between the books and the movies, in a large part because of the way they were structured. There were scenes that were in the three movies that didn't correlate to the book, like Boromir's death in the Fellowship of the Ring, the movie, didn't actually happen until the Two Towers. And some of the stuff with Sam and Frodo that was in the Return of the King happened in the Two Towers. So that was a little bit of a surprise to me because I didn't remember that at the time I was reading it. And of course, there's the whole long appendices at the end of The Return of the King, which, if you are a Tolkien historian, which I am not, but I have read it. I enjoy it, but it's not my favorite part of the book. I did rank Fellowship of the Ring as 5 stars. I ranked The Two Towers as 4.5 stars, mainly because I didn't like the split narrative. You had Sam and Frodo, and then everybody else. Everybody else was in book three because there's two books in each book, and Sam and Frodo were in book four. And they kind of have the same thing here. Book 5 and 6, 5 and 6, everybody else. Book 6 is Sam and Frodo until everybody meets up. But I didn't mind it as much in the Return of the King because it's the company in the Fellowship of the Ring, then it splits up two towers. But even though it's mainly split up in Return of the King, you do see it coming back together. So I am going to give this one a 5 star. Also, there are things about it that I don't enjoy as much as I did in the past. It is a little bit of the sum being greater than the parts. Some of the dialogue in here is a little bit eye rolling, I would say. Not so much in this book, but in the two earlier books, the songs were annoying to me. But again, it had Sam Gamgee in it. You can forgive a lot for Sam Gamgee, and I do. But it's still an excellent book. I still love almost all the characters in the book, despite the dialogue in Tolkien's need to sing and over describe some things, but still love the book. The second book I finished was Summer Lightning, that I have in this book, A Bounty of Blandings, which also has the sequel to Summer Lightning in here, Heavy Weather. It is a book that I read for the podcast that I do with my daughter Robin. We talk about the works of P.G. Wodehouse. Summer Lightning is often seen as one of Woodhouse's best Blanding Castles book, among one of his best books overall. It is, in some ways, the best of Woodhouse. The characters are interesting. This one, uh, Lord Emsworth has a new secretary, as he more often than not does. I don't remember exactly how many Blandings Castle books there are. I think 10 maybe. But there are many secretaries, at least 8, I would say, because I'm pretty sure Hugo in this one, I think he may still be secretary in Heavy Weather, or he's secretary for part of Heavy Weather. But there's probably like 8 to a dozen secretaries that show up in these books. There's also the old secretary, the efficient Baxter, who is just comedy gold because he's the straight man basically in this. Of course, Lord Emsworth. We also have the introduction of Galahad Threepwood. The Threepwood or Threepgood? Well, Lord Emsworth's brother Galahad, who is a little bit different than Lord Emsworth. Who Lord Emsworth is a little bit absent-minded, mainly concerned about his garden and his prize pig, who makes her novel appearance in this book. She has appeared in a couple of short stories that appeared before the book, but The Empress of Blandings, the pig, is another great addition to the series. I think the two previous books were good, but I don't think until we get The Empress of Blandings does the series really lift up. But Hugo is engaged to Millicent secretly, who is Lord Emsworth's niece. His friend Ronnie is engaged to Sue Brown, a chorus girl, secretly. Uh, Ronnie is somebody's nephew, somebody's son, but I can't remember. There are so many siblings in this family, so I don't know whose parent is his. Uh, so Hugo wants to marry Millicent. Ronnie wants. Ronnie also is basically under the thumb of Lord Emsworth as far as money goes, because Lord Emsworth is an uncle. And in the book, uncles are the ones who are basically responsible for giving people allowances and ants are the ones who are responsible for sticking their nose in everybody's business and making sure that nobody has any fun whatsoever. So that would be Connie, Constance, in this book. And so Ronnie comes up with the idea of stealing the Empress of Blandings in order to discover her and present her to Lord Emsworth in order to get a reward. But he forces the butler Beach to help him, and then people discover him, people discover the pig, people move the pig, and uh, there are engagements broken, there are new engagements, and it's just it's just a storm just brewing and brewing and brewing and brewing in the very best way that Wodehouse does. It just all comes in at once, and it's excellent. One of my favorite Blanding Castles books. Honestly, this one in Heavy Weather, I almost look at as one book, even though they do have separate plots, albeit related. But as an entirety, it's just excellent. This one's also a 5 star. The last book I finished is You Like It Darker. There is already a video out for this in which I go more in depth on this book, so I won't go into it too much. But You Like It Darker by Stephen King is a collection of 12 stories, 7 previously published short stories, and 5 previously unpublished novellas, although there is one, The Dreamers, which is kind of in that really gray area between short story and novella. I decided to look at it as a novella, which, if you've been following along with my Stephen King rankings, that means I don't have to adjust my rankings at all because I had already read the 7 short stories in here previously and already accounted for them in my rankings. So I don't need to add any stories from this that I hadn't already had for my rankings. I will be honest, the short stories are not my favorite. Red Screen and Willie the Weirdo, really dislike them. I wouldn't necessarily put Red Screen as one of the worst stories, but it's not far off. The Fifth Step, written well, good story, very super predictable ending, which kind of ruined the enjoyment of the story for me. Uh, Finn, good story, should have been a novella. Another story, and I kind of see this with him a lot recently with short stories that doesn't really have a very strong ending. On Slide In Road, good story. I really like the story, but it is very much an homage to A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, which King admits. The Turbulence Expert is not great. It just the characters didn't really work for me in it. In the idea of an organization having people on planes basically being turbulence experts and keeping planes in the air didn't really work for me. It almost feels like, and I don't know if this is the case, I could be completely wrong, but it almost feels like when King edited the book Flight or Fright, that he felt he had to write a story about air travel and he kind of forced it. And it just doesn't work very well for me. Lori, about a widower who is given a dog and forms a relationship with that dog. At first, like, I don't want this dog. And then it's like, I love this dog. And then an encounter that they have. I really like that one. That is my favorite short story in this book. When I did my video about this book, I will let you know 12 stories. Stories 12 through 6 are all the short stories, and the top five are the novellas. The novellas, Two Talented Bastards, Bastids, is about a famous author and a famous artist who don't really show their talents until later in life. And it's a little bit of a story of how they got those talents. Uh, Excellent first part of the story. I think once you get to, because the first part of the story is basically through the eyes of the author's son. But once you get to basically the author's telling of the event that happened to get them their talents, kind of died down. There's a trope that King occasionally uses, and I don't have a lot of experience with him using it well. It's not as bad as gangsters in his stories, which is probably the trope that he misuses the most, but this one still isn't particularly good. Still a good story, especially the first half, but kind of just dwindled down. Uh, the Dreamers is basically a Lovecraftian type of story about a Vietnam veteran going to work for a scientist who is doing experiments with people when they sleep, kind of with their dreams. It's very good. This is the one that could have been a short story, could have been a novella. I think it probably could have used a little bit more. I think even though it's novella length, that it feels a little short and that we could have gotten a little bit more, but still a very good story. The three novellas that are remaining, I said in my video, really any of these could be number one for different reasons. Uh, I know which one I picked for that video, but I could pick one of the other one now as my number one, and I would still feel comfortable. But in order, Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, it is the longest story in here. It's like 160 pages long. It's about Danny Coughlin has a bad dream, sees something in the dream, and he goes to check out the location he dreamed about, and he does find what he sees in the dream there, which is a body, and he reports it to the police, does it anonymously through a burner phone. He's not a master criminal, not a criminal at all. So it is discovered that it was him who did it. And the detective, who King pretty much says, yeah, this is my version of Javert from Les Mis, uh, is determined that Danny is the murderer. He also has a partner, Ella, who she thinks Danny's the murderer too, but she's a little bit more mentally stable, I will say. Jalbert, the of the story, Javert of the story, also has OCD, which that tends to increase throughout the story. Uh, I really like this one. It was very frustrating in the best possible way because you and I know when we read this that Danny is innocent, a man. Just he's an average man. He works as a uh, custodian in a high school. He's just trying to do the right thing, and he is getting railroaded because of this, and getting ostracized and rejected, and it's very frustrating. I would not be surprised if we don't see some of these characters in other stories. Possibly Danny, I would say though, if we do see any character from here, probably Ella definitely should see, and I would love to see. And the last story is The Answer Man, which a lawyer is driving down the road. He sees a sign for The Answer Man. This is like in the 1930s, the first time. And it's basically like $25. I will answer any question. First two questions are free, and then you have 5 minutes for any other question you ask. And the lawyer asks him questions, some to verify that he actually knows what he's talking about, and then some about his future. And we see that these answers turn out to be true. And then later on, I think it's probably maybe like because the first one happened in 1937. I don't remember exactly when the second one happened, but I think it was in the 1950s. I think it was I'm thinking 1955, but I'm not certain on that. But he sees the answer man again. It's now I think $200, and I think you only get 3 minutes of questions, and only the first one is free. And of course, he asks questions, and they turn out to be the answers turn out to be true, but not necessarily in the way that he expects. And then he sees the answer man one more time. We're told at the start of the story that he sees him 3 times. So that's not a spoiler. And it's about mortality and grief and empathy. It is also probably oh, there's another story in here that I forgot too. It's also, to me, I think the most emotional story in the book. The story I forgot about real quick is Rattlesnakes, another novella, one of the three that I think could be switched for number one. It is sequel a sequel to Cujo in the fact the main character, Vic Trenton, is a character in Cujo. He was the father of Tad Trenton and the husband of Donna Trenton, who were more prominent characters in Cujo. Uh, Vic and Cujo didn't necessarily stand out that much. Obviously, Tad did, and obviously, if you've read the end of Cujo, Donna does. You understand that. But Vic is now in his 70s. He has the death of his son way in the past in the 80s. And he's also a recent widower. Donna has passed away. He is living, well, he's not living, he's staying in Florida at a friend's house. It is during the early part of COVID, and he runs into a woman who is pushing a stroller. In the stroller are two pairs of clothes, and they are for her 4-year-old twins who she acts as if they are there. Her twins died at the age of 4, uh, sometime after his own 4-year-old child died. They were attacked by rattlesnakes. And the story did not go where I expected it to go. One, yes, there are rattlesnakes involved. For a while there, I was thinking, okay, the kids were killed by rattlesnakes, and that's where the title came from. But it seems like rattlesnakes aren't going to play a part again. They are. The story definitely doesn't go in the direction that I was expecting. I will say that the twins do make an appearance. Tad makes an appearance. There's also a reflection on Vic's past with his wife Donna in the events that happened after Cujo and before Rattlesnakes, which I mentioned in the video. King writing about mortality in old age. That's kind of his wheelhouse now. His wheelhouse used to be children in horror of the imagination, and now it's the horror of life and what's coming and knowing that we're going to die. That is it for the 3 books that I read in June that were not sapphic romances. But please like and subscribe, leave a comment, and I will talk to you next time.